The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the neatly manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates, a suburban neighborhood where the houses all looked the same. The grass was always perfectly trimmed, and the homeowners association ruled with an iron fist. Lena Carter adjusted the straps of Noah's small backpack, her fingers brushing against the Braille name tag she had specially made for him. At 5 years old, Noah was full of laughter and curiosity, his world shaped by sound and touch rather than sight. His service dog, a gentle golden retriever named Buddy, nudged his hand with a soft whine, signaling that it was time to head back inside. Lena smiled, ruffling Buddy's fur before taking Noah's tiny hand in hers. "All right, sweetheart, let's go home," she said, guiding him carefully along the sidewalk. Noah loved these afternoon walks, the way the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, the distant hum of lawnmowers, the chirping of birds perched on the perfectly spaced trees that lined the streets. To him, the neighborhood was a symphony of sounds, each one a note in the song of his world. Buddy was his anchor, his protector, the one who helped him navigate the spaces he couldn't see. Lena had fought tooth and nail to get Buddy certified. As a service animal after Noah's diagnosis, battling skeptical doctors and skeptical neighbors, but nothing had prepared her for Karen Whitmore. Karen was the HOA president, a woman who wore her authority like a crown, her sharp bob haircut and designer sunglasses giving her the air of someone who had never been told no in her life. She patrolled the neighborhood like a general inspecting her troops, clipboard in hand, ready to dole out fines for anything from unapproved mailbox colors to grass that dared to grow half an inch too tall. Lena had heard the whispers about her, how she'd gotten her husband's real estate business exempt from HOA fees, how she'd sued a neighbor over a tree that blocked her view. But until today, Lena had managed to avoid crossing her path. That changed in an instant. One moment, Noah was giggling as Buddy licked his fingers, the leash looped securely around his wrist. The next, a black SUV came roaring around the corner, tires screeching against the pavement. Lena barely had time to react before the vehicle jerked to a stop inches from where Noah stood. The window rolled down, revealing Karen's pinched face, her lips curled in displeasure. "That dog is in violation of HOA bylaws," she snapped, pointing an acrylic nail at Buddy. "Pets are not permitted on common grounds without prior approval." Lena's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. "He's not a pet," she said evenly. "He's a service animal. He's legally allowed to be here." Karen's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "I don't see a vest." "He doesn't need one," Lena shot back, her patience fraying. "The ADA doesn't require service dogs to wear identification. Now, if you'll excuse us—" Karen's face twisted in frustration. "This isn't over," she hissed before rolling up the window. Lena exhaled, turning to guide Noah away, but then the unthinkable happened. Karen threw the SUV into reverse without looking. The leash, still wrapped around Noah's wrist, caught under the tire. A scream tore from Lena's throat as Noah was yanked forward, his small body hitting the pavement before being dragged several feet. Buddy barked frantically, lunging to try and free him, but the leash held fast. Time seemed to slow as Lena sprinted forward, her heart pounding in her ears, her vision tunneling on her son's terrified face. "Stop!" she shrieked, slamming her hands against the SUV's rear window. The vehicle lurched to a halt. Karen stepped out, her expression more annoyed than concerned. "What is your problem?" she demanded, as if Lena were the one at fault. Lena didn't answer. She was already on her knees beside Noah, her hands trembling as she checked him for injuries. His elbows were scraped raw, his clothes torn, his face streaked with tears. Buddy whined, pressing close to him, his tail tucked between his legs. "Are you okay, baby?" Lena whispered, her voice breaking. Noah nodded shakily, his fingers clutching Buddy's fur. I'm okay, Mommy," Karen scoffed. If you'd kept your dog under control, this wouldn't have happened, she said, crossing her arms. He shouldn't have been in the way. Lena's blood turned to ice. She stood slowly, her hands balling into fists. You just dragged my blind son behind your car, she said, her voice dangerously low. And you're blaming him? Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of sirens cut her off. Neighbors had called 911, and within minutes, the street was swarming with police and paramedics. Lena clung to Noah as the EMTs checked him over, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not to her son. But as she watched Karen smooth her hair and flash a practiced smile at the officers, a sickening realization settled in her gut. Karen Whitmore wasn't going to face consequences, and that meant Lena would have to make sure she did. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the small, curtained-off area where Noah sat perched on the edge of the hospital bed, his legs swinging slightly as a kind-faced nurse finished bandaging his scraped elbows. Buddy lay at his feet, his warm body pressed, close, as if he could absorb every ounce of his boy's fear. Lena watched. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her nails digging into her sleeves. The doctor had assured her Noah's injuries were minor, bruises, road rash, nothing broken. But the image of his small body being dragged across the pavement was seared into her mind, replaying in a relentless loop. The police had taken their statements, nodding sympathetically as Lena recounted what happened. But when they turned to Karen, their demeanor shifted. She had been calm, collected, flashing her real estate license like it was some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. It was an unfortunate accident, she'd said smoothly. But really, if the child had been properly supervised, Lena's jaw clenched. She had seen this before. The way people like Karen twisted the truth, made themselves the victim, made her the problem. She had spent Noah's entire life fighting for him, fighting doctors who dismissed her concerns, fighting schools that didn't want to accommodate him, fighting strangers who stared or whispered or treated him like he was broken. But this was different. This wasn't ignorance. This was cruelty. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her neighbor, Marisol. They're saying on Nextdoor that Karen's calling it a minor incident. People are siding with her. I'm so sorry, Lena. Lena exhaled sharply, her thumb hovering over the screen. Of course they were. Karen had spent years ingratiating herself with the neighborhood, hosting wine and wine parties where she gossiped and collected grievances like trophies. Lena had never been invited. She was a single mom, a freelance graphic designer who worked odd hours, who didn't have time for backyard barbecues or HOA meetings. She was an outsider, and Karen had made sure everyone knew it. The curtain rustled as a uniformed officer stepped in. Officer Ruiz, the same one who had taken her statement earlier. His expression was carefully neutral, but Lena didn't miss the way his gaze flickered, to Noah before settling on her. Miss Carter, he began, we've reviewed the security footage from the Rodriguez's doorbell cam. It confirms your account of the incident. Lena's pulse leapt. So you're arresting her? Ruiz shifted uncomfortably. It's complicated. Ms. Whitmore claims she didn't see your son, that the leash was caught under her tire before she reversed. There's no evidence of intent, and given the circumstances. He trailed off, but the message was clear. Karen wasn't going to jail. What circumstances? Lena snapped. That she's rich? That she's friends with the chief of police? Ruiz held up a placating hand. I understand you're upset. Upset? Lena's voice cracked. She could have killed him! Noah flinched at the raised voices, his small fingers tightening in Buddy's fur. The nurse shot Lena a warning look. Swallowing her rage, Lena forced herself to lower her voice. What happens now? We'll file a report. You can pursue civil charges if you want, but... Ruiz hesitated. Ms. Whitmore's lawyer is already involved. It might be a long fight. A long fight. One Lena couldn't afford. Legal fees, medical bills, time off work. Karen had resources. Lena had a maxed-out credit card and a savings account that barely covered rent. She was still reeling when the hospital door swung open again, this time revealing a smug-faced Karen flanked by a man in a tailored suit. Her lawyer, no doubt. Karen's eyes swept over the room, lingering on Noah's bandages with something disturbingly close to satisfaction. "Oh, good. You're still here," she said, as if they'd simply run into each other at the grocery store. "We need to talk." Lena stepped between her and Noah, her body vibrating with barely contained fury. "Get out!" Karen sighed, as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Accidents happen, but if you insist on making a scene, I'll have no choice but to report that dog for aggressive behavior." She nodded toward Buddy, who let out a low, protective growl. "See? Exactly my point. The HOA has strict rules about dangerous animals." Lena saw red. "You're threatening to take his service dog?" "I'm simply reminding you of the rules," Karen said sweetly. "Now, I'm willing to drop the issue, provided you sign this." Her lawyer extended a document, the legalese dense and intimidating. Lena scanned the first line. Release of liability and non-disclosure agreement. They wanted her to stay silent, to let it go. For a heartbeat, she considered it. Maybe it would be easier. Maybe she could just take Noah and Buddy and move somewhere far away, where Karen couldn't touch them. But then Noah's voice piped up, small but steady. "Mommy, is the bad lady gone yet?" Something inside Lena snapped. She took the paper and tore it in half. Karen's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "No," Lena said, her voice quiet but steel-edged. "You are." As Karen stormed out, her lawyer muttering about consequences, Lena pulled out her phone and dialed the only person she knew could help. The line rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Lena?" "Jake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I need you." There was a beat of silence, then the sound of movement, a chair scraping back, a low, dangerous promise. "I'm on my way." The next 72 hours passed in a blur of hushed phone calls, legal threats, and sleepless nights. Lena had barricaded herself and Noah inside their house, jumping at every car that slowed near their driveway, every knock at the door. The neighborhood's reaction had been worse than she'd feared. Karen's version of events had spread like wildfire, painting Lena as an unstable mother who'd let her child wander into traffic. The HOA had slapped her with a violation notice for creating a public disturbance, and a certified letter had arrived that morning, demanding Buddy's removal for excessive barking and aggressive behavior. Lena had laughed bitterly at that. 1. Buddy hadn't left Noah's side since the incident, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a silent, watchful vigilance. The only bright spot had been Marisol, who'd shown up with a casserole and a USB drive containing the Rodriguez's doorbell footage. "For when you're ready to fight," she'd whispered before hugging Lena tightly. But Lena wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. She was fighting the system Karen had rigged, the police who shrugged, the neighbors who averted their eyes, the lawyers who spoke in circles. She was exhausted. And then, at 3:17 a.m. on the third night, her phone buzzed with a text that sent her heart racing. "Outside. Don't turn on the lights." She crept to the front window, peeling back the curtain just enough to see the silhouette of a man standing in her driveway, his broad shoulders outlined by the dim glow of the street lamp. Even after 5 years, she'd recognize that posture, anywhere. The way he stood like a soldier even in civilian clothes, like the world was a battlefield and he was always on guard. Jake. She unlocked the door so quietly the hinges didn't make a sound, but Buddy's ears perked up instantly. He let out a soft woof as Jake stepped inside, his boots barely making a sound on the hardwood. The last time Lena had seen her older brother, he'd been clean-shaven, his hair regulation short, his smile easy. The man in front of her now was different. His jaw shadowed with stubble, his eyes sharp and assessing as they darted around the room, cataloging exits, threats, vulnerabilities. But when his gaze landed on Lena, something in them softened. Without a word, he pulled her into a hug so tight she could feel the Kevlar vest under his jacket. "Where is he?" Jake murmured, his voice rough. Lena led him to Noah's room, where her son slept curled around Buddy, his bandaged arms visible even in the dark. Jake's breath hitched. For a long moment, he just stood there, his hands flexing at his sides like he wanted to punch something. Then he bent down, brushing a gentle kiss against Noah's forehead before backing out of the room. "Tell me everything," he said when they reached the kitchen. Lena did. She told him about Karen's power plays, the HOA's threats, the way the police had dismissed her. Jake listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every word. When she finished, he reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a laptop. "First thing tomorrow, we're getting a restraining order," he said, typing rapidly. "But tonight, we're gathering evidence, everything you've got, texts, emails, that doorbell footage." Lena hesitated. "Jake, she's connected. Her lawyer's about to have bigger problems." Jake flipped the laptop around, revealing a paused video of Karen at what looked like a country club, laughing as she handed an envelope to a man in a police uniform. "Meet Chief Reynolds, Karen's college buddy. Also the reason your police report disappeared." Lena's stomach twisted. "How did you get this?" Jake's smile was all teeth. "I called in a favor from a guy who hacks for the Pentagon." He snapped the laptop shut. "Karen thinks she's untouchable, but she's never dealt with us." The next morning, the Willow Creek HOA meeting was in full swing when the doors burst open. Karen stood at the podium mid-sentence, her voice dripping, with faux sympathy as she addressed the packed community center. "Tragic accident, of course, but we must consider the safety of our neighborhood. That's why I'm proposing an amendment to ban all non-essential animals from—" The room's murmurs died as 5 men in military uniforms marched inside, their boots striking the floor in unison. Jake led the pack, his posture rigid, his gaze locked on Karen. The crowd parted instinctively, chairs scraping as people shrank back. Karen's mouth hung open, her speech forgotten. "Major Carter," Jake said, his voice carrying without raising it. "United States Army Special Forces. And you—" He stepped closer, close enough that Karen had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Are under investigation for child endangerment, witness intimidation, and corruption of public officials." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face went sheet white. "You can't just—" "Oh, we're just getting started." Jake nodded to one of his men who slapped a thick folder onto the table. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, even a recording of Karen bribing the chief to lose the accident report. But the damning piece? A screenshot from her own security camera, clear as day, showing her looking directly at Noah before, reversing. The room erupted. Karen's allies turned on her in seconds, their outrage deafening. The HOA board members scrambled to distance themselves, stammering about misrepresentation and full cooperation. Through it all, Jake stood motionless, his eyes never leaving Karen's as her empire crumbled around her. "You messed with the wrong family," he said softly. And for the first time, Karen Whitmore looked afraid. The room was in chaos. Karen Whitmore's carefully constructed facade of authority shattered in an instant, as the HOA members erupted into shouts, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of betrayal and outrage. She stood frozen at the podium, her manicured fingers gripping the edges as if it were the only thing keeping her upright, her face drained of color as the weight of Jake's. Accusations settled over the room like a storm cloud. The folder on the table might as well have been a bomb, its contents detonating her reputation, her influence, her entire carefully curated life. Lena watched from the back of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around Noah, who buried his face in her shoulder at the noise. Buddy pressed against her leg, his body tense, sensing the shift in the air. She had almost refused to come, terrified of facing Karen again, but Jake had insisted. "She needs to see you," he'd said, his voice low and unyielding. "She needs to know she didn't break you." And now, as Karen's wide, panicked eyes flickered toward her, Lena straightened her spine and held her gaze. The HOA president opened her mouth, to deny, to deflect, to spin another lie. But before she could speak, the doors at the back of the community center burst open again. Two uniformed police officers strode in, their expressions grim. Not Chief Reynolds, Lena noted with a flicker of satisfaction, but strangers, officers from the neighboring precinct, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. The crowd fell silent as the taller of the two stepped forward. "Karen." "Whitmore?" he called, his voice carrying across the hushed room. Karen's lawyer, a slick-haired man who had been whispering furiously in her ear, stepped forward. "My client has no comment." "She's under arrest for felony child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and bribery of a public official," the officer interrupted, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The room erupted again, this time in gasps and murmurs. Someone in the back started clapping. Karen's face twisted in fury. "This is a witch hunt!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That woman!" She pointed a shaking finger at Lena. "And her deranged brother set me up." Jake didn't move, didn't react beyond a slow, cold smile. "The evidence speaks for itself," he said simply. As the officers led Karen out in cuffs, her heels clicking frantically against the tile, the HOA board members scrambled to regain control of the meeting. The vice president, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Alvarez, stood and cleared her throat. "In light of recent events," she said, shooting a nervous glance at Jake, "the motion to ban service animals is hereby dismissed. Permanently," she turned to Lena. "And all fines against the Carter family are revoked, effective immediately." Lena exhaled, her shoulders sagging in relief. It was over. Except it wasn't. The aftermath over, the next 72 hours, Karen Whitmore's empire crumbled with stunning speed. The local news picked up the story, running segments with titles like HOA President Arrested in Shocking Scandal and Military Veteran Exposes Corruption in Suburbia. The doorbell footage went viral, shared thousands of times with hashtags like Doc Justice for Noah. Reporters camped outside Karen's million-dollar home, shouting questions as she ducked behind her lawyer, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Meanwhile, Chief Reynolds resigned in disgrace after the bribery evidence was leaked to the press. The DA announced a full review of past cases tied to him, including several where Karen had mysteriously avoided consequences for past violations, a DUI from 3 years ago, a fender bender she'd blamed on the other driver, a restraining order from a former employee who'd accused her of wage theft. The more the public dug, the more they found, and the angrier they became. But the most damning blow came from an unexpected source. Karen's own husband, Greg Whitmore, a silver-haired real estate mogul who had always seemed content to let his wife wield the neighborhood power, filed for divorce the morning after her arrest. Worse, he handed over a trove of documents to investigators. Emails proving Karen had used HOA funds to pay for personal vacations, manipulated zoning laws to benefit their properties, even blackmailed a neighbor into selling their home below market value. By the time the sun set on the third day, Karen's bail had been revoked, her assets frozen, and her social media flooded with furious comments from former friends. Lena watched it all unfold from the safety of her living room. Noah curled beside her as Jake and his team worked quietly in the background. They had set up a temporary command center at her kitchen table, laptops open, phones buzzing with updates from contacts in the military and local law enforcement. It was overwhelming, surreal, like living inside a movie. This is too much, she whispered to Jake as he scrolled through another news article. I just wanted her to leave us alone. I didn't want all of this. Jake set down his phone and turned to her, his expression unreadable. This was always going to happen, Lena. People like Karen, they don't stop. They keep pushing, keep taking, until someone makes them stop. He nodded toward Noah, who was giggling as one of Jake's men let him feel the patches on his uniform. You think she would have let this go after Buddy? After you? She'd have come for him next. Lena's blood ran cold. He was right. The reckoning. Courtroom was packed on the day of Karen's preliminary hearing. Lena had debated not going. Noah didn't need to be near that woman again. But Jake convinced her. He needs to see justice happen, he'd said. He needs to know the good guys won. So she sat in the front row, Noah on her lap, Buddy at her feet, as the judge reviewed the charges. Karen looked like a ghost of herself. Her designer clothes hung loosely on her frame, her hair limp, her makeup hastily applied. When the judge denied her request for bail, citing her as a flight risk, her knees buckled, and her lawyer had to catch her arm to keep her upright. Then it was Lena's turn. To speak. She stood, her voice steady as she read her victim impact statement. She talked about Noah's nightmares, the way he flinched at the sound of car engines now, the way he asked every day if the bad lady was gone. She talked about the terror of watching him dragged across the pavement, the helplessness of fighting, a system rigged against her. And then, for the first time, she let herself cry. The judge's face was stone as he turned to Karen. You showed no remorse. You manipulated, you lied, you endangered a child. This court has no tolerance for that. The sentence was harsh, 5 years in prison plus restitution. As the gavel came down, Karen screamed, a raw, guttural sound of rage, before the bailiffs dragged her away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Jake and his team formed a protective barrier around Lena and Noah as they made their way to the car. The sun was shining, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. For the first time in weeks, Lena breathed freely. It's over, she whispered. Jake squeezed her shoulder. Yeah, he said. It is. Karen Whitmore may be behind bars, but corruption in HOAs is still running rampant. Have you ever been bullied by your HOA? Have you witnessed abuse of power in your neighborhood? Share your story in the comments below. We're exposing the truth, one HOA at a time. Subscribe to the HOA stories for more shocking exposés, survivor stories, and tips on how to fight back. Turn on post notifications so you don't miss our next video. Military dad destroys HOA after they fined him for flying the American flag. Tag someone who's dealt with an HOA nightmare. Let's make sure no one suffers in silence.